Hi everybody, I am Miss Trout, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to create a pointillism project using only markers and one set of complementary colors. So for this project, I had my students pick any fruit that they wanted, and then using reference photos that I put on the board, I put about a couple dozen of them. They got to sketch their fruit on this nice cardstock paper, and once they brought it to me to get approved, then they could start with the marker. As far as the marker goes, they got to choose only 2 colors, and they had to be a set of complementary colors. So we talk about the color wheel. We explain that complementary colors are not only directly across from each other on the color wheel, but they also neutralize each other. So that's more color science. So we talk about how that happens in nature, where those colors show up in nature, but then we also talk about those 3 sets, those 3 main sets. So we have red and green, purple and yellow, and then orange and blue. They get to choose from one of those 3 sets. Once their sketch has been approved, they've chosen their set of complementary colors, they can get started on their dots. They really need to make sure that their sketch is drawn super lightly so they can erase the pencil at the end. And the 2 main tips I have is that 1, all dots are the same size, just like pixels would be in an image. And then also that the dots are closer together where they want it to be darker or have more shading, and then the dots are further apart where they want it to be lighter. So I hope you enjoy the video and you get to make your own pointillism piece. Alrighty, so I'm starting out by sketching my dragon fruit for this project. I have a couple dozen reference photos of different fruit up on the board for my students to look at while they're doing this sketch, and I really make sure to tell them to draw lightly. At the end of this project, you erase all of the pencil, so you really want to make sure that you're drawing lightly enough where none of it shows up at the end. I do take away points for bad craftsmanship if I can still see the pencil. And there you can see I added the cast shadow to the right, but I realized that I had drawn the fruit kind of up and to the right, so I wanted to balance out the composition and make it more symmetrical by adding the cast shadow to the left. So in that, I decided that the light source would actually be coming from the top right. It's super important to figure out where your light source is coming from before you start the dots and before you draw your cast shadow, so that you can figure out where the darkest parts of your fruit will be and where the lightest parts of your fruit will be. So obviously, if the light source is coming from the top right, the shadows would be along the bottom left of the fruit. So I started going in with the red first because I knew that I would have more red than green most likely in this project. And one of the biggest tips that I can give is that every single dot needs to be the same size. It's very similar to pixels. So if you have one giant pixel and a bunch of small pixels, the image will be distorted on a screen. It's the same with this project and the illusion that it gives when you look at it from far away. You want it to look like one cohesive image, so all of the dots have to be the same size. So if you're thinking, okay, how do I make things look darker and some lighter? You need to think about the density of the dots. So where you want it to be darker, you're adding more dots and they're closer together. And then where you want it to be lighter, you have less dots and they're further apart. That is super important. So that, and then making sure they're all the same size. As for these green little spikes, I tried to make sure that I was still going dark to light where I wanted it to be highlighted, but I do want to add enough dots where you can see it from far away. A big mistake that a lot of students make is they make their project too light, there's too little dots, when really more is more and less is a bore. So you just need to keep adding more dots until you have a nice solid image where you can look at it from far away and you see the entire fruit. And you can see here, I kind of looked at it from further back and I realized that I needed even more of those red dots. So I'm going back in and I'm adding more and more to the darker areas, but I'm doing it in a very random assortment. I don't want to be making rows or making sections of dots because that looks very forced. I want this to be organic in its shapes and in its value scale. You can see that it goes from dark to light on that main dragon fruit, and we want it to stay that way. So you don't want rows of that. You want it to just be an organic value scale from dark to light. So more dots to less dots. And here I started on the cast shadow. The 2 darkest parts in this project are going to be the cast shadow And then for this fruit example, the seeds. So I already created the seeds, as you just saw, by doing a dot of red and then a dot of green right on top. Because red and green are complementary colors, they will neutralize each other when you place them directly on top of each other. So the students had the choice of using only purple and yellow, or only blue and orange, or only red and green. So with this red and green example, when you combine the red and green together and make those dots overlap each other, they should create a brownish black color that will be a really nice dark shadow or contrast to the red and green in the photo. Same for the blue and orange, and same for the yellow and purple. So we're talking about the color wheel and finding a pair of complementary colors and how they neutralize each other. For this cast shadow, I am just doing layers and layers of each of those colors. A layer of red, a layer of green, a layer of red, a layer of green, just over and over again. This will ensure that it is the darkest part of the project. You don't want the bottoms of your fruit to be as dark as the cast shadow, because then it will kind of blend in together and you won't get quite a clear image. So there, I decided it was a good time to erase all of the pencil. I have a pretty good outline of everything, and it was all filled in. So I erased all of the pencil, made sure I couldn't see any, and then now I'm going back in and kind of reinforcing some of those shapes with more dots and more color to make sure that they're really defined and there's a good amount of contrast. Here I'm going back in and just adding more of a light green. So if some students are asking, does this color count as green, or does this color count as blue or as yellow? You kind of have to just use your own knowledge of color and determine if that works for you, if the color they're choosing works for the complementary colors. In this instance, this light green, it does work for me. So that light green and that dark green are both definitely green. So I allowed them to use that lighter green color if they chose the red and green complementary set. And so here I'm just adding that light green back in. I'm using it to create a little bit of a shadow on the inside of the slice. Obviously, it wouldn't be a green shadow on a real dragon fruit, but in this instance, it does create a nice little contrast to the red and the dark green in the other parts of the artwork, and it allows for some space between the seeds and then the outer part of that slice. I'm also using that light green and more red to add some shadow on the outside of these green spikes. They looked a little bit too flat to me, so by adding this little cast shadow for each spike, it just adds more depth and makes it look more three-dimensional, so you're making it look more like a form. So there you go. That is the end product. And then I also have some other examples that I've done in the past: red and green, blue and orange, and then purple and yellow. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.